Most of us are familiar with the fascinating civilization that emerged 5,000 years ago in Northeast Africa. For some, ancient Egypt brings to mind pyramids and great temples. For others, the gold funerary mask of the pharaoh Tutankhamun. But how did Egyptian society, culture, and customs develop and flourish on the banks of the Nile? And how did it change during its 3 millennia-long lifespan between the Old, Middle, and New Kingdom eras and beyond? That's what we'll explore tonight as we take a look at this fascinating place and time. So just relax and let your mind drift as we explore the sleepy history of ancient Egypt. It's 1922 in Luxor, Egypt, and excavation is ongoing within the Valley of the Kings. The British archaeologist Howard Carter is hard at work, exploring the rocky desert gorge and ancient necropolis. Since 1914, barring a break during wartime, he's been working to find an intact tomb. And earlier this month, 8 years after he started, an ancient stairway was uncovered at the site. It was revealed that the steps led to a sealed doorway, one etched with the cartouche of Pharaoh Tutankhamun. The doorway was then removed, revealing another behind it, one that resembled the entrance to a tomb. Carter sent word to his benefactor, Lord Carnarvon, who joins him today at the site. It's late November and still comfortably warm. They are dressed in the summer fashions of the time, smart linen suits with their sleeves pulled up. Having chiseled a hole into the corner of the doorway, Carter holds up a candle and peers inside. Carnarvon begs to know if he can see anything, and all Carter can reply are the words, "Wonderful things." The discovery of Pharaoh Tutankhamun's tomb will spark a global obsession with ancient Egypt. It will yield more than 5,000 items, many bejeweled and inlaid with gold. A century after Carter's find, millions remain fascinated by ancient Egypt, its beliefs and customs, famed pharaohs and buildings, the aspects of its culture that seem so advanced now. One of the most remarkable things about Egyptian civilization is the fact that it was so long-lasting. Much of what we know comes from the Egyptian priest, Manetho, who wrote the history of Egypt in the 3rd century BCE. While the original has been lost, it's mentioned by a number of classical authors, enabling modern historians to piece it back together. Manetho provided a list of Egypt's rulers, including the names of pharaohs and the lengths of their reigns across 30 dynasties or royal houses. This has been cross-referenced against a plethora of evidence. From the archaeological findings from sites across North Africa to mentions in the accounts of classical authors from foreign lands. This is how we've come to an understanding of events that took place so long ago. Experts have put together a reliable chronology going as far back as 7000 BCE. It's thought that this is when people began to settle in Egypt, forming communities around the Nile River. Stone Age tribes farmed the land and hunted wildlife. They made pottery, tools, and jewelry, some with materials imported to Egypt. Some tribal leaders had become increasingly powerful, controlling large regions around the Nile. They traded with foreign merchants, manufactured a range of goods, and developed an early form of hieroglyphics. This is the culture that gave birth to ancient Egypt, beginning with the early dynastic period, around 3150 BCE. Upper and Lower Egypt were united as one nation under one king or pharaoh, widely believed to be Narmer. These early pharaohs, including Narmer, ruled from Memphis near present-day Cairo. From here, they could control lucrative trade routes to parts of the Levant and Mesopotamia. They could manage the agricultural workforce and stockpiles of food vital to the people and the economy. By roughly 2700 BCE, Egypt had transformed into a centralized state. Thus began the first of three golden ages, known as the Old, Middle, and New Kingdoms. Their periods characterized by stability and prosperity when Egypt was united under a strong government and monarchy. However, they're separated from each other by intermediate periods. When centralized authority weakened and the system broke down. The Old Kingdom era spanned around 500 years between the 3rd and 6th dynasties. The economy grew and trade blossomed, and generally, the result was greater peace and prosperity. The government and pharaoh held most of the power and were supported by an organized administrative system. It was a hierarchical model, with the pharaoh at the top and the chief administrator, the vizier or jat, just below him. The land was split into provinces called nomes, or sepat in ancient Egyptian, each led by local governors known as nomarchs. They managed their own regions, but answered to the pharaoh and sent regular updates to the vizier. This kind of correspondence was only possible thanks to developments in hieroglyphics. By now, language had evolved into a functional writing system, allowing myriad bureaucratic processes centered around record keeping. Systems were put in place to manage various aspects of society: food distribution, taxation, trade laws, and policing. Monument building, schooling, and much more. State-controlled agriculture enabled some improvements in farming, as workers were mobilized to dig canals and basins, refining earlier techniques that improved the annual crop yield. The state also managed religious worship, including the construction of temples, shrines and statues, and festivals and ceremonies for major and minor gods. They promoted the ideology that the pharaoh was a god, something which strengthened each ruler's grip on power. Pharaohs took great care to plan for their deaths. They had themselves buried in elaborate mastaba, or perjed, tombs, a practice that would evolve into pyramid building over time. The founder of the third dynasty, King Djoser, commissioned the first step pyramid within the necropolis at Saqqara, though the next great builder wouldn't come until the fourth dynasty, when Snefru ordered the construction of 3 pyramids. It's mostly down to the rulers of the fourth dynasty that the Old Kingdom is also known as the Age of Pyramids. Snefru's pyramids achieved varying levels of success, but he laid the groundwork for his son to produce something quite remarkable. It was Khufu who commissioned the Great Pyramid of Giza, the only ancient wonder of the world, still standing to this day. At an original height of nearly 150 meters tall, it remained the tallest human-made structure for nearly 4 millennia. Experts still marvel at how a workforce was mobilized to move over 2 million stone blocks, weighing 6 million tons altogether, and then to set them into place with incredible precision. It's something that continues to provoke awe and confusion. Khufu's successors would repeat the same process to build the Pyramid of Khafre and the Pyramid of Menkaure, located in Giza, within the Memphis necropolis. They're collectively known as the Pyramids of Giza. Today, they're synonymous with ancient Egypt, as is the Great Sphinx, thought to have been built around the same time. With the body of a reclining lion and the head of a pharaoh, the massive limestone creature guards the sacred pyramids. The Sphinx and the pyramids speak to developments in architecture, as well as a flourishing of artistic style. Logbooks that have been recovered detail workers' schedules and resources, revealing the bureaucratic administration that made such projects possible. All in all, it was a system of government that seemed remarkably advanced for its time. Yet, centralized administration did have its problems, perhaps the greatest being that it was very costly to maintain. The nomarchs, priests, and Egyptian nobility were paid for their service in the form of land and goods, as were the record keepers, scribes, and officials who'd emerged as a new middle class in Egyptian society. Another huge expense was maintaining the pharaoh's mortuary cult, the state-funded worship of a deceased pharaoh. This was believed to guarantee the pharaoh's continuance in the afterlife, as well as Egypt's prosperity and cosmic stability. Over the centuries, it became a huge financial burden to maintain an ever-rising number of royal cults. To build shrines and temples, give out land grants and labor, to fund twice daily offerings to long-deceased pharaohs. This weakened the economy to such a point that powerful nomarchs began to challenge the pharaoh's authority. The situation worsened after a long period of drought, leading to widespread famine and unrest. These were some of the reasons for the government's collapse in the early 22nd century BCE and the start of the First Intermediate Period, lasting almost 130 years. It was an era of rivalry and civil wars between tribes, with local rulers competing for food, land, and power. However, culture continued to thrive within independent regions. Some experts point to grander burials across social classes as a sign of provinces becoming wealthier during this time. Two groups would become particularly prosperous: the Heracleopolitan dynasty of Lower Egypt and the Theban dynasty of Upper Egypt. Ultimately, the two would fight for power, and the Intefs would triumph around 2055 BCE. Their leader, Mentuhotep II, became Egypt's new pharaoh, reigning over a reunited Egypt. He ruled from Thebes in present-day Luxor, as did his 11th dynasty successors. Mentuhotep's reign marked the beginning of the Middle Kingdom, a second golden age in Egypt's timeline. This period saw a return to centralized government and was characterized by economic and cultural growth, political stability, and foreign expansion. It also saw a return to the mortuary cult, albeit a version that was cheaper to sustain with pyramids and temples that weren't as enormous or extravagant, and cults that generally ceased with the end of a dynasty. A pharaoh's cult might be absorbed into that of another god, with ritualistic offerings and ceremonial worship incorporated into the practices of a working temple. This protected the deceased's spirit in the afterlife at a fraction of what it cost to sustain a mortuary cult. There had been a shift in religious attitudes since the Old Kingdom. While the pharaoh was still considered a god, imbued with the divine power of kingship, the role had evolved into more of an intermediary, delivering messages between the gods and the people. Meanwhile, local deities had gained widespread popularity, rising to the ranks of major gods. Osiris, in particular, became a prominent figure and was worshipped and revered across the nation. Among his other roles, he was god of the afterlife, presiding over a soul's judgment after death and having the final say as to the individual's fate. This represented a major change in beliefs. Previously, only the pharaoh had been guaranteed entrance into the afterlife. Even high-ranking elites could only hope to join him by having themselves and their families buried close to the royal tomb. Now, life after death was available to all, providing that they'd lived in accordance with Maat, the term for both the goddess of order and a representation of cosmic order in its own right. Simply put, this meant behaving with virtue, being honest and kind, respecting people and the environment. It was a belief system that emphasized individual piety and encouraged the kind of actions that would benefit society. Egyptians might think twice about criminal or immoral behavior, knowing that it would likely result in a second, final death. Alongside Osiris, the god of wind and air, Amun had also emerged as a major deity. Later, he'd be merged with the sun god, Ra, becoming king of the gods, Amun-Ra. Amun's cult was centered around Thebes, the god having displaced the city's former patron, Montu. Pharaoh Senushret I of the 12th dynasty is thought to be the first leader to commission a large-scale shrine to Amun. The White Chapel, or Jubilee Chapel, was located at Karnak, within the massive temple complex. Karnak would eventually become the largest religious complex in the ancient world, yet more evidence of Egypt's architectural prowess. It was constructed over a period of around 2,000 years, though we might credit the pharaohs of the Middle Kingdom for having begun the project in the 20th century BCE. Today, it's an open-air museum attracting tourists from far and wide and includes a reconstruction of the White Chapel, an open-air kiosk made of white limestone. It's decorated with a series of bas-relief carvings, the images appearing raised and sculpted in the stone. It reveals the high-quality craftsmanship and artistry of the Middle Kingdom, the kind that resulted in a variety of art forms, made via different techniques across a range of materials. And the military efforts of Middle Kingdom pharaohs would yield additional materials for artisans to work with. Amenemhet I, founder of the 12th dynasty, had fortified Egypt in the northeast. Named in ancient texts as the walls of the ruler, his defensive frontier offered protection from eastern attacks. Both Senushret I and Senushret III held military campaigns in what is modern-day North Sudan. At different times, they conquered the area, then called Nubia, and built huge stone fortresses to maintain control, gaining vast amounts of resources mined in Nubian quarries. Egypt was enriched by building materials, things like sandstone and quartzite, used in pyramids and other monuments. There was also a plethora of more traditional riches, metals including gold and colorful gemstones. Precious metals and jewels might be brought back to Egypt and used to make items like jewelry or furniture, such as sculpted chairs inlaid with gold and ivory, or ceremonial gold weapons encrusted with gemstones. Luxury items were exchanged as gifts between royalty and the elite, and were often buried with them to take into the afterlife. The higher the deceased person's status, the more provisions they would have to sustain them in the afterlife in a state of eternal bliss. A recent excavation of a Middle Kingdom tomb uncovered a fine beaded necklace, including a hippopotamus head amulet and a copper mirror with a lotus-shaped handle. Such things give us insight into ancient Egyptian culture and the standard of living that some enjoyed. No doubt, society's poorest members would have experienced life quite differently to those further up Egypt's social pyramid. Even so, there might have been benefits to being an Egyptian, like having a range of foods available at the local market. Irrigation projects in the Middle Kingdom helped make agriculture a little more stable. This reduced farmers' reliance on the rhythms of the Nile, resulting in a steadier production of grains, fruits, and vegetables. Different nomes specialized in particular foodstuffs, dairy products, for instance, where there were high numbers of cattle, or fruit like pomegranates, where the conditions lent themselves to farming. These were then redistributed throughout the kingdom via Egypt's tax system, amongst other mechanisms. The result was that a variety of goods were sold at market, from bread, beer, fish, meats and cheeses, to fruits and vegetables, herbs and spices. There were also non-comestibles like linen to make bedding, leather bags and sandals, jewelry, and papyrus. Some items might be imports, like olive oil from the Levant, used for cooking and lighting oil lamps. Higher-priced items were valued in debin, a unit of weight in copper and gold. This helped buyers and sellers to know the worth of each item and decide which items might be appropriate to barter for. Most goods were exchanged through a system of bartering. A pot of coal eyeliner, for instance, might be swapped for perfumed oil. A jug of beer for fresh fish, or a few loaves of bread. And this high standard of living stretched beyond goods sold at the market. It was in the access to entertainment like musicians and dancers, available for everyone at religious festivals, leisure pursuits like wrestling and playing board games, and family days out spent fishing for pleasure. It was also in the opportunities for boys of scribal families to attend school and develop their skills as future bureaucrats. Students were taught a form of cursive writing, as well as elements of mathematics that would be useful for record keeping. They may also have read works of Egyptian literature, which had blossomed during the Middle Kingdom. Writing had become more than a means of keeping records. There were texts offering wisdom and moral instruction, and what some modern experts interpret as satire or propaganda. There were fictional narratives like The Shipwrecked Sailor and The Tale of the Eloquent Peasant. Although the vast majority of the population remained illiterate, they might have heard stories retold from memory. Likely, they'd have been aware of religious works like the coffin texts, the magical spells that opened the afterlife to all. The Middle Kingdom era lasted for around 4 centuries, beginning its decline in the early 17th century BCE. The economy had become strained by military campaigns, ambitious irrigation projects, and large-scale construction. At the same time, the monarchy was vulnerable, following a high turnover of pharaohs in the 13th dynasty, most of whom ruled for only a short time. Once again, local governors were ready to exploit the power vacuum. They began to challenge the pharaoh's authority. Although this time, it wasn't the nomarchs who divided Egypt, but a foreign power to the east. People from the Levant, who are sometimes referred to as Hyksos, had been emigrating to the eastern delta from the 18th century BCE. The term Hyksos means ruler from a foreign land. It's often used to describe this dynasty and its kings with roots in the Levant, who brought with them their Levantine and Canaanite traditions. As their numbers grew, they gained a political foothold and enough military power to seize control of northern Egypt. This was the beginning of the Second Intermediate Period, lasting between 1674 and 1549 BCE. Upper and Lower Egypt were split once more and now partially occupied by a foreign power. A new capital was established at Avaris in a northeastern region of the Nile Delta. Meanwhile, the Egyptian government was pushed back to Thebes, where it was trapped between the Hyksos in the north and their allies to the south. The Egyptian kings of Thebes were treated as subordinate vassal rulers and expected to pay tribute to their foreign overlords in the north. They had little option but to comply. To refuse was to risk all-out war Interestingly, the Hyksos adopted aspects of Egyptian culture. They kept the bureaucracy and royal titles. Some dressed in Egyptian fashions and used kohl on their eyes. But they also brought with them their own Levantine traditions, worshipping foreign gods as well as some Egyptian gods, and incorporating their own funeral customs into Egyptian practices. Historically, these Levantine people have been credited with introducing a range of military technology: the composite bow and bronze sickle sword, horse-drawn chariots, and even full-body armor. Modern experts remain divided as to the truth of these claims, citing a lack of solid evidence. Although it's certainly plausible that their technology was absorbed into Egyptian culture and harnessed by its armies. The Theban king, Ahmose I, led a series of campaigns in the 16th century BCE. And after a war that lasted 30 years, the Hyksos were defeated and driven out of Egypt. This marked the beginning of the New Kingdom era, the third and final golden age in Egypt's history. Around 1550 BCE, Upper and Lower Egypt were reunited, and Pharaoh Ahmose I ascended the throne as founder of the 18th dynasty. This might be ancient Egypt's best-known dynasty, with some of its most famous and recognizable names. Some of the pharaohs from this period have come to be known for their building projects and propaganda, others for their trade deals or military conquests. Nubia had been lost after the Middle Kingdom's collapse, but Ahmose I took it back once again. Thutmose III then expanded into Syria and the Levant, transforming Egypt into an international empire that stretched all the way to modern-day Iraq. New conquests brought untold wealth to Egypt and allowed the government to dominate trade markets. Occupied states had to pay an annual tribute, ranging from timber, horses, exotic foods and animals, to ivory, gemstones, gold, and precious metals. Imported materials were used to make all manner of objects, including the kind found in the tomb of Tutankhamun. Despite Tutankhamun having a relatively short reign towards the end of the dynasty, his tomb revealed a great hoard of treasures. Recall from the beginning of our story that the British archaeologist Howard Carter found more than 5,000 items altogether. There were ceremonial weapons, figurines and board games, food, wine, jewelry, and perfumes. There were gilded funerary beds, sculpted to look like animals, as well as gold-plated chariots and model boats. The pharaoh's organs were stored in canopic jars, while his mummified corpse lay within a quartzite sarcophagus. The body was placed inside the innermost of 3 coffins, one made of solid gold and inlaid with precious gemstones. On it, the pharaoh is depicted as Osiris, wearing the new iconic death mask on his head and shoulders. The items recovered here and from elsewhere across Egypt reveal a remarkably high level of skill working with various types of wood, metal, stone, and fabric. Not only dexterity but artistic flair, with many fine and sophisticated details, including anatomical depictions of humans and animals. The prosperity of the new kingdom bred a cultural renaissance in the visual arts like painting and sculpture, as well as professional crafts like textiles and furniture making, and the kind of metalwork required to make Tutankhamun's death mask. There was also another boom in Egyptian literature. Alongside religious texts, protective spells, and prayers, there were scrolls which offered guidance on ethical behavior and poems and stories containing moral lessons. Correspondence found on clay tablets reveal carefully worded diplomatic negotiations between the pharaoh and foreign rulers or vassals. And love poems and letters, hymns and prayers demonstrate the use of metaphors and emotive language. Perhaps the most visible form this artistic resurgence took was Egyptian architecture. Amongst many notable examples, we have the mortuary temple of Hatshepsut, a queen consort who ruled alone after her husband's death and styled herself as a male pharaoh. Often referred to as a masterpiece of construction, it's built into the cliffside at Deir el-Bahri. Its 3 palatial tiers are connected by long ramps and fronted with sandstone pillars, the same color as the cliffside. Hatshepsut also commissioned obelisks at Karnak Temple, joining a number of pharaohs from her own and future dynasties to make their own mark on the ever-growing complex. Thutmose III and Amenhotep III are both thought to have made significant extensions. Whether works of construction were large or small, built to honor the gods or the pharaohs themselves, they were a means of spreading influence about the kingdom and ensuring the ruler's legacy endured after death. This is one of the reasons why monuments might have been destroyed, which seems to have happened with the female pharaoh Hatshepsut. Her image was removed from wall art and statues, suggesting a deliberate effort to reduce her relevance and importance in history. Ramesses II of the 19th dynasty stands out as a prolific builder and master propagandist. Several hundred of his statues have been recovered by archaeologists, alongside the ruins of many other projects. The Abu Simbel temples, built into the Nubian cliffside, are among some of Ramesses's most famous buildings. They're fronted by statues of the pharaoh and his queen, 20 feet tall, magnificent, and godlike. Ramesses had his name added to many buildings, even some that were built by his predecessors, to which he'd only made a few minor additions. He quite literally left his mark on the earth, his craftsmen carving deeper into the stone. He doesn't seem to have minded embellishing the truth, as can be seen in paintings that celebrated his great victory against the Hittites, despite evidence that the Battle of Kadesh ended in a stalemate. Ironically, the truth might be more impressive. Finding himself at an impasse, Ramesses took the diplomatic route and signed what's thought to be the world's first written peace treaty. The Egyptian-Hittite Pact brought an end to hostilities and offered some protection from the Assyrians to the east. But there was little respite for Egypt's military. To the west, the Berbers mounted repeated assaults, while regions around the Aegean coastline were invaded by maritime raiders known as the Sea Peoples. Foreign invasions took their toll on the kingdom and added to the costs of an already stretched economy. Nubia was lost, along with lands in the Levant, reducing Egypt's wealth and monopoly of trade routes. A high turnover of rulers in the later 20th dynasty resulted in a weakening of centralized authority. Meanwhile, the high priests of Amun had accumulated vast lands in Thebes with wealth and power that rivaled the monarchy. By 1069 BCE, Amun's priesthood had control of Thebes and effectively ruled the south or Upper Egypt. The pharaohs controlled Lower Egypt, ruling from the Tanis in the northeastern delta. Yet again, Egypt was divided. Lasting around 400 years, this was Egypt's third intermediate period. It was characterized by invasion from Libyans in the west, who ruled the Delta region as pharaohs for 200 years. The Nubians then conquered Thebes in the 8th century BCE, eventually taking the Delta from the Libyans. The last pharaoh of this era was the Nubian Taharqa, who reunited Upper and Lower Egypt under his rule. Taharqa oversaw another renaissance, building a prosperous realm nearly as large as the new kingdom. He sponsored a range of building projects, including new pyramids, and restored Egyptian traditions alongside temples and artwork. Ultimately, Taharqa's armies would be defeated by the Assyrians and absorbed into the Neo-Assyrian Empire from 664 BCE. This marked the beginning of the late period. Egypt's 26th or Saite dynasty ruled from Sais in the western delta. Having been conquered, they were initially vassal kings, owing tribute to the Assyrians and ruling at their pleasure. Pharaoh Psamtik I managed to drive out the foreign overlords, regaining independence and reuniting Egypt. he restored temples and traditions and re-established a strong government in an attempt to revive the great kingdom of the past. Unbeknownst to him, it would be a short-lived revival. In 525 BCE, Egypt would be conquered by the Persians, and from here on, the kingdom would have mostly foreign rulers. Lasting 37 years in the 4th century BCE, the 3 pharaohs of the 30th dynasty would be the last native Egyptians to rule independently. It ended with Egypt being reconquered by the Persians, bringing an end to indigenous rule. This is where Manetho, the Egyptian priest, ended his history of ancient Egypt, written in the 3rd century BCE. By then, Alexander the Great had ousted the Persians and founded an illustrious new capital at Alexandria in the north. Manetho was writing after Alexander's death, under the rule of his former general, Pharaoh Ptolemy I, a Greek Macedonian like the late Alexander. Once more, Egypt accumulated wealth and power, with Alexandria in particular becoming a hub for trade. Greek culture and customs were blended with Egyptian ones during the nearly 3 centuries of Ptolemaic rule. The last Ptolemy ruler was the famed Cleopatra, and she has a fitting resume for Egypt's last true pharaoh. She's thought to be the first Ptolemy to speak the Egyptian language, a queen who modeled herself as the goddess Isis reborn. The dynasty came to a dramatic end with the defeat of Cleopatra and her lover Mark Antony at the hands of Octavian, the future emperor of Rome. Egypt was absorbed into the Roman Empire, becoming a vassal of Rome from 30 BCE. This brought an end to the title of pharaoh and the royal cult that had surrounded the title, though aspects of Egyptian language, customs, and culture endured right up to the Middle Ages. The story of ancient Egypt is one of endurance and resilience. Through the ups and downs of history, culture blossomed, even in times of division or when occupied by foreign powers. Time after time, the government broke down, only to be remade under a new dynasty. Even today, in the 21st century, thousands of years after Egypt's heyday, we're surrounded by reminders of this great civilization, from buildings like the temple at Karnak, the Great Sphinx and the pyramids, to the artifacts in museums and those still to be discovered, hidden beneath the Egyptian sands.